The story of a simple New York accountant, Richard Harris, began with the fact that he wanted to make some money. In fact, the amount was $50,000 that the New York Zoological Society promised for the capture of a huge anaconda. According to Mr. Harris, for the sake of such a monetary reward, it was worth taking a chance, and he began to prepare for an expedition to South America. The accountant studied a lot of video blogs that talked about the habits of such an expedition. He thought he was well versed and ready to fight the monster. Richard packed his backpack and went to meet the easy money, but it didn't work out quite as he imagined. Unexpectedly for him, he turned from the hunter into the victim. An anaconda is also called a water boa, as it lives in ponds, sometimes creeping out on the land to bask in the sun. Its habitat is quiet, weakly flowing river branches, backwaters, and small lakes of the Amazon and Orinoco basins. The anaconda lies and waits for its prey. It swims perfectly and can remain underwater for a long time. Playing with an anaconda on their territory is very dangerous, and Mr. Harris had to make sure of it personally. Amazonian waters are teeming with snakes, crocodiles, piranhas, and other dangerous creatures, so swimming around was unrealistic. In the end, Richard made, as it seemed to him, a very reasonable decision to rent a boat. But the boat was dilapidated and old. However, he was convinced on the very first day of the expedition this was the right decision. However, one of the oars broke and seriously injured one of his arms. To alleviate the pain, Richard could not come up with anything better than lowering his wounded limb into the water. But in vain. His hand immediately became a target for the swarm of piranhas. In a second, Mr. Harris lost his thumb, and the accountant anaconda hunter was not ready for such a turn of events. In a massive panic, he rocked the boat, which subsequently turned it over. But apparently higher forces came to the rescue as he managed to get ashore almost unscathed. On land, cursing himself for self-confidence and carelessness, he examined his wound and thanked the Lord for a wonderful salvation. Richard was sure that the worst was over, but that was far from the case. So as it turns out, that huge anaconda that Mr. Harris was hunting for just happened to be resting on one of the lower branches on a tree nearby, and so the anaconda had plans of its own that day. The anaconda definitely was not going to become the victim. As they say, be afraid of your desires because they can come true, but not always as you imagined it. The weakened man understood that he could not win the battle with the monster. The snake attacked first, and he decided to use the advice he heard on one of the video blogs. It said that you need to lie still and pretend to be dead, and when the reptile begins to swallow your legs, hit it with a sharp object. To be honest, only a person who had never met an anaconda would give such advice. But at any rate, the hunter could not use this life hack. It turned out that while fleeing from the piranhas, he dropped his knife in the water, and the hope to get out of this fray alive melted before his very eyes. Usually, before swallowing a victim, a water python entwines it with its powerful rings and squeezes it until it faints. But apparently, the anaconda decided that its food was already exhausted and decided to swallow it alive. The man resisted with all of his strength, but soon he was almost completely inside the snake, and then lost consciousness from suffocation. When Mr. Harris came to, twilight had already descended onto the Amazon jungle. He examined his body and was surprised to note that besides burns from the gastric juices of the anaconda, there were no other injuries. Who became his accidental savior? After Mr. Harris stepped back from the shock, he examined the site of the battle with the snake and saw many cat tracks. Apparently, the anaconda was attacked by a panther or leopard and spit out Mr. Harris to save its life. Soon, the adventurer returned home to New York. He reread the announcement of the reward for the capture of the anaconda. It turned out that his statute of limitations had already expired a couple of years ago. Just catching fire on the idea of easy money, the accountant did not pay attention to the date. Here is a good piece of advice. Always carefully study the terms of the transaction, as well as adequately assess the risks so as not to incur trouble. What do you think about this? Who do you think this man should be thanking for his survival? Write about it in the comments. Here is another story about an incredible salvation. The general resonance of the public is caused by cases when people are resurrected, although doctors have already declared them dead. This is exactly what happened with this ordinary American auto mechanic from Ohio. How is this possible, you ask? Now, we will tell you. On August 4th, 2013, in Ohio, a 37-year-old auto mechanic named Anthony simply went to bed. His wife Melissa was next to him until she woke up at 4 a.m. the next day. Looking at her husband, she realized that something was amiss, and Anthony was breathing strangely. She tried to wake him, but everything was in vain. He did not regain consciousness. Fortunately, his wife was a nurse and knew exactly how to do artificial respiration. Pulling herself together, she began to provide first aid. The woman also woke up her son, who called 911. Before the arrival of the specialist, the family desperately tried to bring Tony to his senses, but failed. Upon arrival, emergency personnel were able to achieve a weak heartbeat with a defibrillator. It was decided the patient urgently needs to be hospitalized. So Anthony was taken to Dayton Medical Center, where they were able to stabilize his condition. Doctors suggested that it was a blockage of the arteries, which led to such an attack. The man was left in the hospital for additional examinations. It seemed the worst part was behind him, and soon Tony would be allowed to go home. But unfortunately, the same day, a few hours later, he became very ill and was transferred to intensive care. Doctors worked hard and constantly did emergency rescue procedures. They tried everything, but that was not enough. After 45 minutes, Anthony showed no signs of life. He did not breathe, there was no blood pressure or heartbeat. Doctors pronounced him dead. The man's family was in a state of shock when the doctor came out and said that their Tony had passed away. Lawrence, his 17-year-old son, could not believe what he was told. He entered the room with the pastor, sat next to him, and began to talk to his father. Looking at his motionless body in the hospital gown and pierced by a whole bunch of tubes, the boy did not want to lose hope. He said to his dad, "You will not die." Cardiologist Raja Nazir, who was resuscitating the patient, has repeatedly observed such a reaction from relatives. But what happened next surprised him. A short signal of cardiac activity flashed on the device. An impulse appeared every 2 to 3 minutes, and the doctor did what he had to do. He resumed resuscitation. Slowly but confidently, the specialist managed to bring the man back to life. The pulse is stable, which means Tony will live. But how is this even possible? Emergency medicine professor Michael Serf from Seattle, Washington, dared to put forward his hypothesis. He suggested that these urgent procedures, which were carried out by the clinic staff manually, led to an air injection in Anthony's body. Also, cooling contributed to the inhibition of brain processes and the protection of tissue from damage. This kept the brain from dying, because when it is chilled, it can go without fresh oxygen for a long time. That is, in fact, during the operation, the blood cycle was cut off from the brain, and subsequent manual techniques of heart massage restored blood flow. The main organ was protected, which gave the man an opportunity for life. But the center's doctor was not optimistic, suggesting that as soon as Tony woke up, he would no longer be a full-fledged person. But fortunately, the patient quickly recovered from the resurrection and came to a healthy state of mind. Having checked out, the man gave interviews to many world channels, and everyone asked him, "Tony, what did you see when you were there?" But the answer puzzled them a bit, because Tony said that he only remembers how he went to bed on the evening of August 4th, and then when he woke up in the ward. After some time, doctors put forward another suggestion. The heart of a 37-year-old man could stop due to a viral infection. In 20 years of my practice, I have not seen a single patient who has returned to life after we had pronounced them dead. I have never even heard of such cases, said cardiologist Raja Nazir.